Welcome back, everybody. We're going from zero to producer in 90 days with Ableton Live. I'm your instructor, Tor Bjorn. Welcome to another lesson. This is the third video in our project series where we're making a trap-style hip-hop beat. The first one, we made a sketch. We were doing all of that from the session view of Ableton. The second one, we went through all of the edits, messing with our clips and doing a few things with the notes and with the rhythms. And now this third video is going to be all about sound design. If we just quickly recap our last video, the theory behind sketches is that you write a lot of ideas as often as you can, as many as you can, and try to do that every day. And then you listen back at a later date and move forward with the ones that feel inspiring at that time. The stuff that we were doing with editing on the arrangement view, we were looking at transitioning one section to another. So like between our verse and our chorus, make sure that we've got things happening with the notes so that we're able to shift gears into the next section and doing that in like a pleasing sounding way. We were looking at some effect samples, doing build-ups, stutter drums, beat drops. Moving along, this is all about sound design. So we've made a sketch. We've edited our sketch, and now this is all about doing things with our devices and our clip parameters that are going to make our beat more interesting and more unique. So let's dive in. First things first, let's listen to our work in progress. I'm going to go through the first intro, verse, and chorus of this beat so we can get a feel for where we are starting. All right, you kind of get the idea on that beat. Pretty much just different variations of those same three sections are what we're hearing for the rest of the song. Well, I'm going to clean a couple things up because as you can see, we've now got like quite a few tracks, more than what we can see on one screen. So I'm going to first group all of our effects. I'm going to click on this top riser, hold my shift key, and click on this bottom impact. And now I've selected all of my effects tracks. We can right-click and group, or we can just press Command-G or Control-G, and that's going to drop those in a group. We can rename that Effects, and then we can press this little button here, and it will just close it up. And now we can pretty much see everything a little bit easier. That's nice. So the first thing on the list, let's just start going down and figuring out what we got to do to be good sound designers. I've got a note here that pitch bend and transposition is important. I definitely want to do some pitch bend stuff on our bass that we have in the verses. That Reese bass sounds like this. So let's go ahead and go into our instrument here and let's just see what we can do with our pitch bend range. I made this sound with an analog instrument. You can find that over here in your instruments category. Alphabetical order puts it right up at the top. And on the very right-hand side of our analog instrument, we get the global section, and that just changes what we're looking at in the middle display of our instrument. And right here, if you look at this thing that says PB range, that is how many semitones it is going to allow us to pitch bend. Right now, it's set to 2 semitones. So let's go in our clip view here. make this a little bit bigger. I'm going to go down here to our modulation or our envelopes, open up that. Top menu here is going to get set to MIDI control, and then we can access all our MIDI controls. More often than not, I'm just messing with the pitch bend. So again, we've got 2 semitones of pitch bend. So I'm going to draw a dot, draw another dot, and then make a big spike in the middle. And let's just listen to what 2 semitones of pitching up and back down sounds like. Okay, that's 2 semitones. Let's do 7 semitones. That would be a fifth in terms of our music theory. Here's what a fifth pitch bend sounds like. Sounds pretty good. I think I'm going to set this to 12. That's a whole octave. So this note here, if we go back to our notes part of our clip, you can see that we're on a D, and pitch bending it all the way up is going to pitch it up to a D an octave higher. Pretty cool. I'm going to go ahead and delete that, and I'm actually going to draw a couple things in here. I don't want to get too fancy with this. I'm just sort of thinking about this as like sprinkles on the cupcake, if you will. A few make it nice, but too many are just going to get in the way. Let's get our click track going here so we can find the right beats. So I'm thinking these 2 beats in the middle here, we can do a little pitch bend. And I'm just going to select that section. Oops, we got to drag that one over. We only want it to be 4 spaces. Click and drag to select, Command D to duplicate, and now we've got 2 like a wee-oo. Let's listen to that. Maybe we can, on this 3rd note, do one that goes down. And we'll do another one of these fast ones at the very, very end. Actually, let's get rid of the one at the end. That's too much. Just the 2 is enough. All right, now let's turn our solo off. Let's turn our metronome off, and let's listen back to that. Cool. And then let's go down here to our very last one. And we're going to do that same pitch bend up, but we're just going to leave it up at the end to get rid of that last dot. Maybe we'll drag it back here a little bit and shorten this note. I want to emphasize this space, this empty space right before our chorus a little bit more. Cool, we're going to need to finesse that a little bit more, but for now, that's okay. Let's move over to our second verse. I think this clip here with these ones, we can just copy and paste. And maybe on the second one, if you guys remember, we did a big drum build-up. So maybe instead of doing those like very short pitch bends, maybe we'll just do like one long one that happens over time. So we'll put a dot at the beginning of our last note and then a dot at the end of our last note and just drag that line all the way up to the top. And then that's going to sound like this. Gives it that extra little push of energy leading up into the chorus. I like that a lot. That's good for pitch bend. This type of song doesn't have a whole lot of like monophonic leads or simple sounds, so pitch bending the chords and stuff might be a little bit weird. I guess technically we could go into this last chord here on the verse where our bass pitches up. We could do the same thing with our pads. So here we're looking at an instrument called sampler. We normally just work with simpler because it is quite simply a simpler instrument to work with. But we get a few extra things on the sampler that we don't get on simpler, which can be quite cool. If we go all the way to the tab on the far right that's called MIDI, that's where that pitch bend range is. So we're just going to want to set that to 12, just like our bass. That way, when we pitch this note up, it pitches up the same amount of semitones, and it sounds similar to the pitch up that the bass is doing. So same thing, I'm just going to draw a dot at the beginning, draw a dot at the end, drag that line all the way up to the top, and then it will sound like this. That's pretty nice and easy, gives us that extra little push of energy. Let's move on to effect sends and returns. So we've looked at these a little bit before. We've got these extra tracks down here at the bottom. This one's called reverb and this one's called delay. These are return tracks. So you don't put any audio effects, on a return track, you don't put any audio clips or MIDI clips, but rather you send like a duplicate of the sound that is being made by one of your tracks up here to this track. And then it gives it its own lane where you can adjust audio effects and get the dry sound. So a great example would be in this bass on our first verse. We do that pitch bend up and then it kind of just disappears. That'd be a great moment to go here to our first send, which is sending to our first return, which is a reverb effect. So if we right click, show automation in new lane, then we can go in here and drag a big line up like this, and it's basically going to just be adding additional reverb sound to that bass, and that will sound like this. We could even go down here to our reverb, select this decay time and make it a little bit longer so we can make that effect a bit more dramatic. Then it just kind of decays and washes out a little bit at the end, and that will help us a lot with this space leading into our chorus. Let's take solo off of that bass and hear it all together in context. Awesome. So we can definitely do that for lots of other sounds. I can imagine like this kick drum that plays by itself. Let's right click on that first send. Show automation in new lane. Select. Now we get this extra lane down here for our reverb. We can just go ahead and select that note, click and drag, grab our little dot, drag that all the way up at the top, and then now all of a sudden that kick drum has like a big, sounds like it's in a big canyon or something. Bah. Definitely on these beat drops, that stuff will be super useful. We can grab the stutter hi-hats and the snare and this last hi-hat, and let's drag it all the way up to the top, and then we just grab this top left dot and click on it to delete it, and then we can draw like a ramp up really easily. Maybe we'll drag this other one up on the last hi-hat just so it hits its max volume on that note. And let's hear that in context. Little extra reverb helps fill that space. Let's go over here to our second verse. We've got a similar thing going on here. We'll just grab all of these notes, grab our center dot, pull that automation line all the way up, delete our top left one so we've got a big ramp, and then we'll just grab that peak and drag it over so that it hits the max volume on that hi-hat, that last drum sound. Now let's take a listen to that. Excellent. I definitely think that we could put a bunch of reverb on this impact sound. Just drag it all the way up. Maybe even turn it up a little bit. I like the sound, but yeah, it just needs to be really atmospheric to get that effect that we want. That's cool with effect sends and returns, and we can automate those just like we can with all our other stuff. Next up, big important thing when it comes to sound design is like, especially in dance music and EDM music and bass music and in hip hop and trap music, is we just need everything to knock super hard. We just need it to feel punchy and big and aggressive and larger than life. And these two audio effects, OTT and saturation, I think are like the key to making everything sound bigger and better. If you've heard any EDM song or if you've heard any trap hip hop song, you'll be familiar with the sound of OTT because that has really defined like close to a decade of what beats sound like. Let's try it first on our drums. I'm going to solo the drum pattern on our chorus. Sounds like that. I'm going to go in here to my audio effects, open up the presets for multiband dynamics, and I'm just going to grab an OTT and drag it to the end of our device chain here after the drum rack. So every part of the drum kit is going to be affected by this OTT. Here's what it sounds like with OTT. Let's hear it without again. So there's some good sounding aspects from both of them. With it off, it feels like that kick drum and that snare really pops. But with it on, it feels like everything is like really compressed and really gritty and really big sounding. So what I like to do is just grab this time knob, drag that up a little bit, and that's going to allow some of that punchiness to come back through. And then grab this amount and drag that around somewhere between like 40 and 60%. And that's just going to reduce how compressed it is. We like the compressed sound, but we don't want it to be overcooked or it's going to lose what we liked about it in the first place. So now we've kind of got like half of that OTT sound and then half without that OTT sound. And let's listen to that. Nice. Kind of get the best of both worlds that way. I would say that anything that's not a bass, anything that's not really, really subby, lots of like low frequency information, low notes, low pitches, OTT is like probably going to make it sound cool. So let's try it on our other instruments as well. Let's try it on the pad. Oh, look at that. I literally already have OTT on this pad. Well, we can try and drag our time up and drag our amount down and see if we can finesse this setting to get it perfect. So it seems like with the amount all the way down, we get a little bit more of that round, full, low pitch sound. And as we drag it all the way up, it gets brighter and really wispy and airy. So maybe we'll put that on the low side on the amount down around 40. All right, let's take a listen to our second pad. This one feels like it gets quite a bit louder with the OTT. Again, I'm going to drag that time up just so it's not squashing the dynamics so quickly. Pull this amount down. That's pretty cool. I like that for now. And let's just double check on this pluck sound. That pluck sound gets like really aggressive with the OTT on it. The other thing that's worth mentioning is that where you put the OTT in your effects chain, if you've got other effects on there, it'll have different results. So it's going to really compress the sound and really make it quite aggressive sounding. And if we put that after our delay and reverb, then the sound that comes from that delay and reverb gets more aggressive in addition to the regular sound getting more aggressive. So let's drag this OTT before our delay and our reverb so that we're not compressing and squashing those sounds. We're just compressing and squashing the original sound. And now I'll put it back so we can hear the difference. When it's after the reverb and after the delay, it takes a lot of the characteristic away from the sound that I liked. This is a pretty plucky sound, similar to like a hi-hat or a drum, really, really loud and really short. So I think the same settings apply. We'll drag that time up and that amount down. And just compare what it sounds like without it as well. You'll probably notice that it tends to make things sound a little bit brighter. Some of that middle frequency and low frequency content kind of like gets turned down a little bit with these settings. So you just got to bear that in mind. If you really like that something is very lo-fi and distant sounding, OTT might not be the right effect. The other thing that we want to definitely mess around with is saturation. Super important for your drums, super important for your bass. Let's take a listen to this 808 and see if this sounds better with some saturation on it. Very low pitch sound, not a whole lot of high frequencies. I'm listening on pretty small speakers here in my studio right now, and I can still hear that even on my small speakers that don't reproduce a lot of bass. But you can imagine if you're listening on a phone or on a laptop, you just wouldn't be able to hear that sound at all. Maybe even your car stereo, depending on what car you drive. Saturator is a great way to add some extra high frequencies. By default, you'll probably see it look something like this. If we open up this menu, we've got all kinds of different like flavors, if you will. I like to think of it as like less buzzy up at the top, down to more buzzy down at the bottom. So let's listen to that, and I'll cycle through those different options so you can hear how they sound. Analog clip, not doing a whole lot. Let's go to soft sine. Now it's like bringing out some of that sound a little more. Medium. We're definitely getting more high frequency sounds now. And we'll go to hard curve and just listen to that one last. Now we're adding like tons of extra high frequencies. So I personally like stuff that sounds really distorted. Some people want their stuff to be more clean. It kind of depends on your preference and the style of song. But one thing that Saturator definitely does is it makes your sound a lot louder. So I'm going to turn that output down. And then let's compare with it on and off. I like the distorted sound, but it might be a little bit too much. Grabbing the dry wet knob and pulling that back, maybe somewhere between 30 and 40%, is probably going to get the right balance between clean and like fat sounding bass and that extra gritty distorted sound so that we can hear it on our phones and laptops and all that stuff. Nice, that sounds pretty good. Let's mess around with a little bit of saturation on our drums as well. Let's take a listen here. I think this snare sound, we could probably do a little saturator on that. So if you remember from our drum rack lesson, each one of these cells is a different chain. So like the OTT, we put that after the drum rack in the chain. And so every sample that is in the drum rack is being affected by that. But here, when we click on our snare, you can see we've kind of got this like last little corner of our drum rack. I put the saturator inside of that. So now only the snare drum is getting affected by that audio effect. There's with it on, here's with it off. I like it. It just gives it a little more of an aggressive feel. Now maybe we'll do the same thing with the kick. Grab a saturator. So if I were to drop it here, see you get this light blue line. If I dropped it there, it would be outside of the rack, so every sound would get affected. But since I put my mouse a little bit to the left, now it's like inside of the rack. Now it's going to be only on the part of the instrument that is affecting the kick sample. So now here's what that kick sounds like with a little extra hard curve. Let's take it off and listen again. I think it sounds better with it on, personally. But that's just me. I like stuff being nice and distorted sounding. All right, that's it for OTT and saturation. We can listen to our whole drum. We can listen to our whole drum clip real quick here and just see how that sounds now. That kick and that snare definitely cut through a little bit nicer now, which is good. Just gives us that little extra punch. All right, let's look at what we can do with the auto filter. Let's drag one onto our chords here for our first verse. All auto filter does is it like takes some of the sound away. And depending on what setting you have, it might take the sound away from the top frequencies first, moving down to the low frequencies. Or if we had it on this other second setting here that is called a low cut, then it would start removing the low frequencies first. So what I want to do is I want to just on this last chord before we go into our chorus, I want to use an auto filter to get rid of some of that sound over time. But I don't want it to just turn down in volume. I want some of the frequencies to disappear, but not all of them. I think because the other instruments are removing and we have our energy getting, we have the energy at the end of this verse getting taken down with like some reverb hits and our reverb on our bass. I'm going to start by removing the high frequencies on our chords. Auto filter, right click on the frequency, show automation in new lane. Just click and drag this chord, drag this down pretty low, maybe not all the way to the bottom, and then just get rid of one of those dots and it'll turn that square into a line. And now it sounds like this. It's like a volume decrease, but it's a little more subtle because we're not getting rid of all of the sound, we're just getting rid of part of the sound. So on our chorus, on our verse 2, because we're doing this stutter edit buildup, it might be cool to do the same effect on our second pad that's in our second verse, except start from the low frequencies getting removed first, all the way up to the high frequencies. So added another auto filter to our pad 2 track, changed the filter type here to be a low cut filter, and then pretty much the same process. Right click on the frequency, show automation in new lane, select the chord that you want to change, drag that frequency from the bottom all the way to the top, and then just get rid of one of the dots by clicking on it, and then that square becomes a ramp. Another really cool trick, if you hold your Alt key on Mac, and I think it's Alt key on Windows as well, you might see your mouse becomes this mouse with a little curve button on it, or like a little half circle. And what that is going to allow you to do is select your automation and curve it. So we can have it be less movement in the first half and more movement towards the end of that chord. Another thing that might be cool, this resonance, making that a little bit higher, that'll just give us a little bit of like a boost of the exact frequency that's getting taken away. So it kind of adds this swooshy sound. And I'm actually going to right click on the number 12, which is the on off button for the track itself. And I'm going to show automation in new lane on that. And I'm just going to turn this whole track off at the end of that effect because it's got a long decay on the instrument itself. If we were to go over here to our filter section, it lasts for up to 4 seconds after you stop pressing the note. And we definitely want the notes to completely disappear. So automating that on-off button is like a mute button on a mixer. Nice. We were able to emphasize that build up a little more. Also, the A key on your keyboard will turn all your automation lanes on and off. So that's a great example of automation with auto filter. Some other things that we can automate. Well, any audio effect can be automated, of course. We can automate volume. Automating volume is definitely something that you'll want to do. I like to use the utility audio effect. You technically could right-click the volume of your track and show automation in new lane. And we could do some volume changes here, and that's all good. But where that gets tricky is that now, see, we've got this red dot here saying that it's following our automation line that we've drawn. So if I decide that like, this track is actually a little bit too loud, I want to turn it down. If I turn my volume down, then you'll see that our automation lines turn gray, telling us that we're no longer using the automation because something has changed. We get this little orange arrow up here telling us another reminder that like, hey, some of your automation is turned off because you changed a setting. And now that we've found the right volume at -15, if we turn our automation back on, it's going to snap back up to -9. So we can kind of like get ourselves into a little bit of trouble if we're automating with the volume knob instead of with the utility. I'm just going to right click and delete automation on that for now. Put this back up to where it was and drag a utility on there. Utility does a bunch of stuff, but it also is handy because it just has a volume knob on it. So we can automate the volume on our utility, draw a bunch of crazy lines here and do whatever we need to do with our volume automation with the utility. And then we still have full control over turning the overall volume of our track up and down with the volume knob. So let's go ahead and delete that volume automation. And what I actually want to do is I want to have these pluck chords, I want to have this arpeggiated pluck start quiet and get louder every time that the chord changes. So I'm going to go here to my gain on my utility. I'm just going to draw a little line, something around -6 or -7, and then click on one of those dots so you can see. If we expand this a little bit, you can see that we've got our little mini ramp here. I'm just going to select that and Command D over and over and over so it repeats that shape on all of the chords. And let's take a listen to that. Nice. And now that we've drawn that automation there, rather than drawing it again on our second chorus, we can just hold Alt and we can just copy that whole clip over there, and you'll see that the automation moves with it. If you're ever copying clips and you don't want the automation to move with it, you've got this little padlock icon here. That icon is called, our handy help window will remind us, it's called Lock Envelopes. And what Lock Envelopes does is moves the clip, but the automation stays put. Handy little button there. Last thing that I think we should automate is pan. Pan is whether or not it's in the left or in the right speaker. So we can right-click here on our pan control. We're able to move it from one speaker to the next. We could right-click it and we could show automation in new lane if we wanted to, or there's an audio effect that makes that a little bit easier, and that's just the auto pan effect. So I'll just click and drag that onto the track. The amount is how much from left to right it's going to move. So at 0%, it doesn't move at all. At 100%, it moves completely only in the right speaker and then completely only in the left speaker. And then the rate is how fast it is. I like to click this musical note, and then you can just select bars or beats and have it be perfectly in time with your song. Maybe we'll do 3/4 of a bar so that it takes 2 bars for it to repeat the motion. Phase, I usually just leave that at 180%. It does some cool stuff, but if you want your sound to just move from left to right, you just don't really want to move that. And then shape is like how smooth of a change. So all the way at 100%, it's going to only go in one speaker and then immediately switch to the other. Or if we drag that shape all the way down to 0, it gets much more round, and then you can hear it slowly move from one speaker to the next. Personally, I think somewhere around 30 or 40 is going to be good for this. Let's take a listen with everything together. Definitely adds a lot of motion. It takes that sound out of the center image, which is going to be the same area that the vocals would normally be sitting when you're considering how far is it in the left speaker, how far is it in the right speaker. Getting things out of the middle that aren't a vocal or aren't a kick drum or aren't a snare drum is going to help us in our next video when we go through and start mixing this. So panning, making things more on the sides than in the center is definitely a good tool. That's all that we got for right now on the sound design stuff. There's definitely lots of different ways that you could do this, and there's definitely lots of different styles of music that would require different techniques. But for this trap style hip hop song, these are the ones that I find myself using the most. As always, at the end of making our beat, we're going to save and export. Command S or Control S to save. Click on our loop bar so we select the whole beat. Command Shift R or Control Shift R to open up our export window. And we'll go ahead and export that in the same folder as last time. I'm going to change this thing in the parentheses that says Edit 1 and just change this to Sound Design 1. Press Save. Ableton's going to do its whole thing, and then we'll have our MP3 of our updated demo of our beat in the folder. We can listen to it, bump it in the car. Big thanks everybody for tuning in and watching another video. Hopefully this sound design stuff was super useful. Big thanks again to Ableton for 90 days of Ableton Live 10 Suite. We're super excited to have these tools at our disposal. Make lots of new beats, and we'll see you next time. Peace out.